The purpose of this startup trip was to show the Frankies who they are by learning about the family that came before them and visiting the places they started up.
For the last leg of our journey, we drove north into Fife and Aberdeen.
This is incredible. What was it in here? What is this?
Our perfect Scottish Airbnb had a cozy fireplace and awesome plaid carpet.
Before I came on this trip, family history to me was just dates and places, like names of places. This trip has shown me that family history is people. It's real people, it's real stories. Is it not true that I was obsessed? I mean, I was in those lines and I was going back to like Roman emperors. Not only am I descended from peasants, which I am proud of, but I'm descended from royalty too. I've always been a pretty ambitious and head in the clouds kind of fella, and maybe that's where that comes from.
We were on the same playing field, same field to begin with, and then you started bossing us around like you were the king. Maybe even commanding us to do different things.
Now I have to go home with this big head.
So on that note of your royal lineage, we got this from Edinburgh. While you were out dancing around in your little kilt, we got your family crest.
Holy cow, are you serious?
At the Edinburgh Castle with, I think, the official stamp from the castle.
We got you the Stuart line because you're both of the Stuart line. It gives the history of the name and the family motto.
That's amazing.
What a beautiful gift. Thank you.
James Walker is listed on Ruby's family's line, but they don't have the death date and they don't have any information on who he was married to or what any of that is. And so this is when it gets a little hard. When you're in the late 1700s and you can't trace records as well, you're trying to find clues that might lead to more information. So if we could find a headstone here, then we would be able to see who the spouse is and maybe potential parents around the area. Kevin just explained that at this church there was heavy rainstorms that washed part of the cemetery away.
A retaining wall around the cemetery failed.
And there were human bones.
It washed into the street of the city just a couple months ago.
So we're gonna go see around the corner what we can find, and there might be nothing. This. Did you see? No, this is it. This is it. So what you would have to do to be able to read that would,
piece of paper on
yeah, get the paper and do the charcoal. You know, like when you rub a crayon over it.
Yeah, I didn't bring
The
my
writing.
crayons.
If we could read this, that's where we would get the information from.
Andrew Walker Heggie is the relative that I've been most interested in. And this gravesite is through his mom's line. So this is either his uncle or his mom's uncle, James Walker. I don't know what I'm doing.
No, look.
But I'm trying to make it wet so that it makes it darker on the inside of the engraving and maybe light on the outside. Maybe it make it easier to read.
The sun's like shining perfectly for us too. Like God's like, all right, we'll let you see it.
Look at this. The sun parted right as I poured water on this gravestone, and literally there's a rainbow. I felt like I was reading something from them, like a letter or something. And what was so cool is that the sun came out right as we were trying to read it, And it was like the lighting changed perfect. It was like they were saying, we know you're here. We're gonna make this easier for you. We're gonna make it readable. And we were able to. It's so exciting.
Imagine you had your family, and your family had their siblings and their parents, and over time, everybody got lost. Well, when we come here and we find something like this, it's like bringing that family back together. This headstone has multiple names on it that match up to Ruby's family tree. It lists out aunts and uncles that we've been trying to look for, that we didn't know before.
I feel connected to Andrew Walker Heggie because I found his name when my children were walking for a trek. And he just happened to have a lot of information about him. So we went with him. And he hasn't left my mind. And then when I happened to just come to Scotland, which I didn't put the two pieces together, and when I realized Andrew Walker Heggie is from Scotland, it just all kind of came together, like it was purposeful.
We visited a few churches, including St. Andrew's that was built in 1158, a place that was a part of Ruby's ancestors' lives.
And Maker Cathedral, where legend has it that William Wallace's right arm is buried. We visited the ruins of Slains Castle and explored the dramatic cliffs nearby, the Bullers of Buchan.
So this is Slains Castle, about an hour north of Aberdeen. It was built in the 1500s. There was a gentleman that became an earl, and then from his posterity on, they kept the castle running. A few hundred years later, the roof caved in. They just didn't have the money to keep it up. We're the only ones out here, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. I'd stay here. I'd Airbnb this. The author Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula, lived close to this castle, and supposedly this castle gave him inspiration for the book.
My mom would be so mad at me if she's watching. I feel like I'm gonna be in trouble.
The palms of my hands are sweaty, my feet hurt, and my body's starting to shake, and it's not because I'm shivering. We're going into the deep, dark dungeon. Johnny said I want to take you to these cool cliffs. It didn't tell us anything about him. And then we came over there and you had to pass this thing that was this narrow with cliffs on either side just to get here. So Ruby and I sat there for like 10 minutes deciding if we were going to cross or not. And now Johnny wants me to go over there. And I just don't know if I love him enough. Of wind came, I feel like I just fly right over the edge. There was absolutely no way I was walking out on the edge of the cliffs until I thought Johnny might have fallen to his death. So I braved the tiny trails. I'm proud of myself, and I also don't even want to think about it. This is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen in my entire life, and it was terrifying. One of the most touching moments of our visit to this area of Scotland was watching Ruby finally read the story Trace provided of Andrew Walker Heggie from his own journal while standing in a field in the area where he grew up.
This is a journal entry handwritten by my great-great-great-grandfather, Andrew Walker Heggie, who lived right here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to. Okay. Andrew Walker Heggie, son of Andrew and Catherine Walker Heggie, born January 9th, 1825 at Parish of Jorgan, Fife, Scotland. I was the 5th child of a family of 10. My father worked on a farm owned by a large farm owner. I went to school till I was 12 years old. Then I was hired by a farmer to herd sheep. While at work, I would get very homesick. There was a large hill. I would climb to the top of the hill and look at my home and the farm, then go back to work. At this time, cholera was so bad my mother died. I never saw her again. I would go home to see my father and brothers and sisters once in a while. Oh, can you imagine being 12? But never went back to school after that. I would take my books, slate, and pencil when I would go into the fields to shepherd. I would study in the evenings. By doing this, I educated myself. It was easy for me to memorize songs. I learned a lot. Learned to play bagpipe, flute, accordion. This reminds me of my son. When I was 22 years old, I went to work. While at this work, I got acquainted with a widow and her daughter. The daughter was 10 years older than I. I married the daughter, and there was a daughter born to us. I heard the gospel preached and was converted to the truths. I was baptized on September 25th. I tried to get my wife to see things as I did, but she could not. She grew more bitter every day. I waited for 7 years to see if she could be converted to our religion. The president of the mission and leading elders persuaded me to go to Zion and thought she would follow me, but it made her more bitter toward me, and she never came. It was a great trial to leave my wife and little girl. She was just 8 years old. The next day I took a steam for Liverpool, then set out for sail for New York.
So something, I have a surprise for you. And it's one of my favorite things because that story is so touching. Especially when you said a 12-year-old boy would go to the top of a hill just so he could look at home. And I was looking at the top of this hill and I saw a little home over there, or over there. There's that longing. There's that longing for a home. And that hit my heart so hard. This little gift is a way to make this story more real to your kids. So there's this beautiful children's book. And it's called The Beautiful Life of Andrew Heggie. And there's this company, this really special company called Four Bears Books. And they take a story like this and they turn it into a children's book. And you can take this home to your kids and you can read it. And it goes through and it explains who he was and what he did. Look, the hills! Look at the hills!
Oh my word.
There's pictures. And there's pictures of his family. Anyways, it's a special way to make it real for your kids too. And you can take that home to them.
That is amazing. My kids are gonna love this. What I keep thinking is just how much love that I have for Andrew and what he did, and how their lives were just as complicated as ours are. How hard would that be to find the church and to love it with all your heart, and to wish that your wife felt the same way, to feel pulled for the love for your wife and the love for the church. And then I have so much love for his first wife too, who she was the daughter of a widow. Of course she didn't want to leave her mom. And so of course the wife is being pulled too for her love for her husband and the loyalty to her mother. And so I just think their lives weren't much different than ours today, and there's so much we can learn about loving each other when we learn their stories. And how much compassion that makes me want to have for members of my own family who are going through complicated pulls of emotions where they're choosing. It makes me appreciate the gift that we have of choice, and how our job as family members is to love each other through those choices that we're all making, even if they're not the choices that we would have, that we would make. And I think Andrew was a great example of that.
A startup trip doesn't have to be far off in some distant country. When you learn about the people you come from, you start discovering their stories are a lot closer to you than you think.
It's never too late to start discovering your own startup story and seeing what your ancestors might teach you about them and yourself. There are so many resources out there. All you have to do is find the desire to learn about where you started up.